Good morning, folks. This is a wonderful Sunday morning. This is Paul McNeil, the crypto curator, and I've got quite a show lined up for us today. We're going to be, and by the way, this is Bitcoin is Freedom. I have my Bitcoin and Politics show on Thursday, but this show is Bitcoin is Freedom because I believe that Bitcoin truly does give us freedom. And with that said, again, it's a Sunday. It's also football Sunday. So, guys, I'm going to make this one, we'll try and make it short and sweet, but we do have to discuss this great topic. But it's bumping right up against my Cowboys and the Commanders. So, I got to get to that. All right. So this show is being powered by Roundly X. If you guys have heard of Roundly X, I'm sure you have. Don John does a great job of marketing that product, but it's a way for you to stack your sats without even knowing you're stacking sats. Why? Because what you do is you connect Roundly X to your bank, credit card, basically. And whenever you purchase things with your credit card, it rounds that purchase up and it does it with Bitcoin, Satoshis, right? So you're constantly stacking sats every time you make a purchase. It's all in the background. You don't even pay attention to it. It's one of the best ways to get Bitcoin. So why don't you guys visit roundlyx.com, check them out, get the app, connect it all up, and have a lot of fun stacking sats. All right, I am going to have a show today about CBDCs. This is a topic that is hot. Everybody's talking about CBDCs, and with good reason. CBDCs have a lot of different perspectives to it, and the question becomes, is it good, is it bad, or is it just downright ugly? I'm going to have Nick, our producer, pop up my slideshow so you guys will be able to get an idea of where I'm going to go with this. And again, if he'll go through the first couple slides, which is just, of course, myself and my sponsor, Roundly X, we're going to look at what a CBDC is to start the show off, right? And that's what the question a lot of people might ask. What is a CBDC? What does that even stand for? What is a bunch of letters? Well, no, it stands for central bank digital currency. And it sounds really not even that powerful, right? A central bank digital currency. What the heck does that really mean? Well, here's what it means. CBDCs are digital cash. The dollars that you have in your hand, they honestly are very powerful. And with the dollar being where it is right now, the DXY at its all-time high, right? Very powerful globally. Dollars are really, really powerful. So this would be a digital version of that. And well, you say, well, Paul, we already have a digital version of cash. It's on your credit card. It's when you go to the bank ATMs. We already got digital money for the most part. Not really, because this digital version of paper banknotes, that's what they are, because this cash is actually issued by the central banks themselves. CBDCs enable consumers to have direct relationship with central banks rather than relying on commercial banks to serve as intermediaries between the two. So when you look at this, this really changes the game, right? Because now you have the Fed, which we all know is not a government entity, right? The Fed is a privately owned company that has a partnership with the public, right? They partner with Congress, they partner with the government. So it's a public-private partnership that issues dollar, and it's been written into law that they're the only ones that get to issue dollars. And so as a result, you have the Federal Reserve. Now, with me today on the show to discuss this, I'm going to bring on both Style Pigeon, who you've seen on my show before, and I'm going to also bring on Nick, which is our wonderful producer, and you guys actually get to see him. And today, hopefully, he has to do two jobs: have this great conversation with us, and then try to run it in the background. So, hey guys, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm so excited about this conversation. We've been going back and forth of this in the crypto Twitter sphere for weeks now that I've been involved, and I think Nick's been talking about it for literally 4 or 5 years. So I'm excited to actually, number one, do some learning from you all, and because you're much better researched about it than I am, and also maybe add my 2 cents to the equation as well.
Well, I'm super excited about this because, like Pigeon says, I've been sort of writing and talking about this stuff for 4 years now since we started Bitcoin Live, and it's a subject dear to my heart. Not because I like them, but quite the opposite.
Well, I'm sure we're going to get into that because we're going to try to talk about the different aspects of CBDCs. We just sort of heard what they were, but we're going to talk about the good, bad, and ugly. Now, in order to get to that, I've done and we won't show this necessarily on the screen, folks. I'll make it public for you on Twitter and things like that. But I went back and looked at all the news concerning CBDCs in the month of September. And there really is a lot of news there. And we'll talk about this, and I'll filter some of it in our conversation. But the majority of the news actually is being spurred, or the majority of the conversation, not the news, the majority of the conversation around CBDCs has been spurred by two people. Natalie Smolinski, and which she's at the BPI, the Bitcoin Policy Institute, and Dan Hale. They wrote a white paper sort of outlining to politicians why the US should not issue a CBDC. And so I can't wait to really dive into that. So let's talk about the first part of a CBDC. I guess the question becomes, what is good about a CBDC? And I don't think either one of you will have anything to say about that, but maybe you do. Go ahead, stop it.
I can actually add one thing that I do think would be good. And it's the thing that everybody mentions immediately when we talk about CBDCs is it is actually convenient. The idea of bringing a digital currency to the central banking system would end up being more convenient for people who are used to dealing with, fiat currencies. Essentially, all that it is updating our current system where we have paper money or paper notes, and those go away. So we don't have to use the paper. The Fed saves a lot of overhead, which, they're running a business. I can't blame them. And that allows for a little bit more convenience as far as bringing a pseudo Web3 appearance to an already centralized banking system. So that's not bad.
And I would like to add to that, that it's one of the things that they always use to promote it is it will help the unbanked, right? Because even in America, there are like millions of people that are unbanked, which is hard to imagine, but there are, and all over the world, there are many, many millions more that are unbanked. So it would lead to financial inclusion, which in itself is not a bad thing. And theoretically, you could do other great things with central bank digital currencies like they tried in China.
Like they tried. It's good. And one of the things too we have to realize, and this is where, again, to bring Ripple into this, is one of the things that Ripple was trying to do was they made an attempt, or they were making an attempt to provide a solution for the banks. And they realized that the banks also have a problem. And that is the banks have what's called Nostro and Vostro accounts, which means that if a bank in the United States has citizens over in Japan, in order for those folks to interact, that bank must send money to over Japan so they can hold into the account, because citizens there want to transact in dollars. And so they have to have money sitting in an account. And this money is dormant for the most part, can't go to work for the most part. And so these Nostros and Vostros accounts, as well as messaging, the thing is that I think most citizens don't realize the banking system, in order for it to operate effectively, has several components to it. There's a messaging component, there's actually sending the money component, and digital currencies have the ability to really create, and I think both people might have said this, the efficiencies in the system so that you can move money around faster, easier, better. And central bank digital currencies probably could be a way to do this. Cross-border payments from country to country, different, I think there are some good pieces to CBDCs, but I don't think they outweigh the bad pieces.
Go ahead, Nick.
Go on. Well, there was one more thing that I would like to add. Raoul Pal seems also to be in favor of CBDCs, or at least neutral on them. And one of the things that he mentioned is like it leads to behavioral economics, right? So that you can micromanage the economy, which of course is music to the ears of central bankers because they like to manage everything. So in theory, you could micromanage things to perfection.
Jack, stop it. I think you had a comment.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm in sales. I sell pharmaceuticals, or I manage a team that sells pharmaceuticals, rather. And one of the things that you'll note from pharmaceuticals is no matter what our product is, we can always tell you something that it does that's positive. Especially like opioids and things that are sold on the market quite prevalently. Like fentanyl is now a rising issue in the U.S. I'm not sure about other places in the world, but it's an incredibly dangerous drug. But it does really work for pain. It works great for people who are in extreme pain if they have some level of opioid resistance. Maybe they're pathways are not producing the right, mu opioid receptors or whatever the mechanism is for fentanyl. That's a great thing, right? If somebody's in extreme pain, maybe they have some extreme condition like bone cancer, which creates a whole bunch of pain that can become an issue if you have it for a longer time because you grow a resistance to that medication. And opioids are primarily our, blunt force instrument when it comes to eliminating pain. And fentanyl does a better job than any other medication does. But it's also killing people by the hundreds in the US right now because it's eventually gets diverted from the legal system and becomes a street drug and gets mixed with all sorts of other things. And then you have this massive issue. So uh, it's hard for me to say, the convenience and the speed with which a digital currency could be used is much of a positive, given that our financial systems don't operate very poorly at the moment. I mean, you can get money, and the unbanked thing is something to be concerned about. But even in the U.S., I mean, if you're unbanked, I don't see that being much other than a decision made by certain people or maybe a lack of exposure. But I mean, I don't know anybody that doesn't know that banks exist.
No, no, I would like to say that the unbanked issue is already being solved by crypto itself, right? I know certain unbanked people who are actually living off crypto and Bitcoin successfully. So in that sense, we really don't even need banks anymore, you could argue, as some do, and that you are ready to be your own bank. But, that is, of course, why CBDCs are here.
Yeah. One of the other components that they talk about, and I know both, I believe Natalie and Sam brought this point up, is that, one of the good parts about a CBDC, if you can really say it's a good point, given what I'm going to bring up is probably not a good point to bring up, but listen, when we needed stimulus, if they need to push out stimulus checks to everybody, right? If you had a CBDC and you had an account with the Fed could just pop that money right into your account and you can spend that money, and it would have made it much easier instead of waiting on checks and paper in the mail system. And I mean, it creates that. Granted, the opposite of that is we shouldn't be giving people money like that in the first place, but
that's arguable. We'll leave that for someone else to.
Yeah,
exactly.
And
but what you said. Go ahead.
And another great thing about CBDCs is you could solve the green problem, right? The problem with the environment, with the carbon credits. You could fine people and companies for polluting their environment or using dangerous chemicals or fill in blank, and you could penalize them directly, instantly, without intermediaries. It would be direct and transparent.
Exactly, and that to be honest, that leads us right into the bad problem CBDCs, right? Because when you look at it, there was a question that I have that both Dana and Natalie brought up, and they said, will the issuance of a CBDC strip the public of their financial control, privacy, and freedoms? And so that's what I want to ask you guys, and maybe we can noodle on that a little bit. When you look at our financial control, our privacy, and our freedom, CBDCs, do they really strip that from us?
I'll go first. CBDCs don't do that. What does that is the rise of corruption, given the overreach of power that people have a tendency to lean into. The biggest issue with government and the way that we run our civilizations is the fact that people are involved. If people are involved with that system, then eventually someone's going to make a bad decision. Someone's going to make a bad choice. Someone has to hit the button that sends the nuke, right? Even, if we want to talk about nuclear arms or whatever, nuclear arms are not bad inherently. They're simply a technology. If they just sit there, then it's not really a big deal. Same thing with CBDCs. If we were to institute a CBDC and it was run in a citizenry focused, benevolent way, I'm fine with it. But I'm also not so naive that I think that that's going to be possible.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head because, it is a centrally controlled digital currency, and it's not only centrally controlled, but it's centrally controlled by a central bank. And when I look around the world today and I look at the amazing job central banks have done, the last thing I want to give them is money that they can control and micromanage and use as a means to make us do things that we really don't want to do.
Exactly, and Style, you nailed it. I mean, me and Nick both had this conversation. I think it was last week, maybe it was even on Thursday. We were talking, and this is the problem, and this is what people make. It's not CBDCs are not the problem. The problem is the people behind the CBDCs, and it ultimately comes down to us. Financial control. If someone wants to control you financially, the question becomes, why would a government want to do that in the first place? And we always say the government, but the government made up of individual people that are probably related to us in some way, our cousins, brothers, mothers, uncles, aunts, right? We're related to these people in government. You have to be. The whole world is connected. So you mean to tell me your family wants to control the entire planet or whatever? Why would they do that? Have better control over yourself.
Yeah, and another thing I think is you can sort of compare it to playing a computer game, right? And some games you have overpowered weapons, and if one of the players gets control of such a weapon, the game is basically over, right? Because there's no fun anymore. That player has won the moment he gets his hands on that weapon, and I think CBDCs are like that weapon in a computer game, right? It's totally overpowered. It's like using a bazooka to fight a mosquito, right? So they should just not be used. Yeah, it's my personal opinion. I think we should just not go down that route at all, if possible. I mean, I understand that we already are down that route. So we have to sort of manage the situation and mitigate the danger, and if possible, roll them back or at least limit their fallout.
Yeah, you mentioned that we're already there. So in the paper, the BPI, I think they mentioned 109 countries are already testing, piloting, or actually using a CBDC. Here are some of the countries that are piloting it: Hong Kong, Thailand, China, the UAE. China actually has theirs in operation, so they have a successful pilot of it. The countries that are announcing the pilot: Australia, Singapore, Malaysia, South Africa, the Bank of Ghana, right? And the ones that are working on it: Saudi Arabia, Thailand, France, Taiwan, Israel, India. They're all of these countries. They are actively working to launch a CBDC. And Nick, both of us have sort of been on this. We've been talking about it constantly. It's going to happen, whether we like it or not. I don't think there's a way of stopping a CBDC coming into operation. The question becomes, now as citizens, what do we do in a CBDC environment? Is there a way for us to operate?
By the way, I just opened the CBDC tracker, which you can just fill in on your browser, and it's like a really good website where they sort of track all the CBDCs being in development, pilots.
What is that called? CBDC tracker?
CBDC tracker. Yeah, it's a really useful website that I came across, and I can highly recommend. But I think mitigating the danger of CBDCs is what it's all about. I think I think Jamaica already has a working CBDC, and the Bahamas. And I also remember a long time ago when I started researching this, that the Marshall Islands also were one of the first, if not the first, with working on the CBDC, which was called the Sovereign. I have no idea what has become of them, because they're sort of dropped out of the news once the IMF said that they were not ready yet for CBDCs for some reason. But of all the sort of benevolent CBDCs out there, what I read from the ideas behind the Sovereign on the Marshall Islands, that was the one thing that I saw. Okay, maybe. And I would like to add to that is, the Marshall Islands are, of course, a tiny group of islands with a government that's very relatively weak. So that's why I think you could say that if a government is very weak, or if a country is very tiny, people have the ability to vote with their feet and just get out of there if they're mismanaging the economy, and then they can't do much danger, because then the government actually has to listen to their citizens if they can leave. But the problem, and the problem is in right what we have right now, which America, Europe, China, even Russia, sort of going down the CBDC route, is that there will be nowhere left to go with your stuff.
Yeah, the sovereign sort of died off. There's a website that's still out there, sov.foundation/Marshall Islands. But honestly, and I was in contact with one of the guys who was actually behind the project, but that has in fact died off and it did not advance. But I'd be interested to find out.
That's probably because it was a good CBDC.
Actually, I think it was a good CBDC, and I think it was one that definitely limited government's overreach, and I think that might be why. But the website is still up. 2018 was the last time that they actually talked about it. But yeah, it's going to make me have to go back and look at the sovereign. Thanks for bringing that up.
You mentioned the fact that it's a good CBDC, that it did place some limitation on governmental control or the influence that they could have over that currency. What sort of implementation are they doing? How are they limiting that control?
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I'll search the website.
So on the website, they have 4 different deals: sustainability, fair, safe, simple. Under the safe, it says Solve's compliance protocol ensures every Solve user undergoes compliance checks with registered verification, but user details are kept private. So there was a privacy built into the user component of that that would not allow the governments to have the ability to look at transactions and things of that nature. Now, again, being created by the government, who say they don't have a back door, but on the front of it, it's talking about privacy being kept with that asset.
Okay, so the thing that I want to make sure that I point out while we're talking about this particularly is that the thing about rules is that people have to follow the rules. And right now, we have people all over the world who are sovereign in some sense, whether they're part of an elected body or an unelected federal government position that they have. They're in power in some sense, and they don't follow the rules. That's the issue, right? The issue is actually corruption. So I don't, if they say, well, we promise we're not going to do anything bad with this. I just don't trust them. And that's why I believe in Bitcoin in the first place, is it's a trustless system. You don't have to trust me. You can just use it. And that's the way it works. It has nothing to do with good faith or a promise of we won't become tyrannical or corrupted. And that's the issue at its heart, is will a federal banking system that happens to be a digital currency not do what the federal banking systems have done before the digital banking currencies? And I mean, I see zero evidence towards the fact that they're not going to eventually become corrupted. Maybe this works great for 15, 20, maybe even 60 years. But in the next century, if CBDCs roll out, we will see at least several tyrannical states arise. And then we're going to have a very serious issue on our hands, just like we had in the 20th century with the tyranny that arose from various means of control that they were able to establish.
But Style, one of the things that I think, with that being said, and this is one of the conversation I want to have about CBDC, especially with the United States. A lot of people are fearful about the United States having a CBDC, but I will say, and again, maybe I'm wrong on this point, our system that we have set up allows us way more freedom than any other country on this planet. And I believe that if CBDCs were implemented with a control mechanism in there, like our Constitution, there's certain things that just can't be changed on a whim. President can't write an executive order on certain things. If we do a system like that with the money system, where it really does take Congress, executive branch to come together to make this any change to it, I think that could work. And so far, if a United States were to issue a CBDC, I don't believe we're going to become China. I don't believe that all of a sudden the president is going to become authoritarian or dictator type person and be able to say, I want to control all the people in the United States. We would rise up like you've never seen before. And I think they realize that. I don't believe a US CBDC would be equal to a China CBDC just because we see what China's doing. But that's just my thought. I think, Nick, you want to say something? Go ahead,
well, if you don't mind me a repost here.
Yeah, sure.
I think that the issue is all of a sudden, right? I don't disagree with you that all of a sudden it's not going to turn overnight or anything. That's not my concern. My belief is that, well, I'll say that I'm rather conservative in the sense that I move about things relatively slowly. I don't think that changes should be made rapidly. And I think that the government is in a position to start moving those things a little bit more quickly than they would have otherwise, just due to the efficiency and convenience of these new systems, right? The technology is a force multiplier for all of this. So if you look at the history of the Federal Reserve and the current financial system did establish some amazing things, just like credit, for example. Credit is a wonderful tool for the idea of capitalism because it allows you a temporary loan of capital to invest, and with the good faith that you will invest that wisely or you'll be punished for that. That's a great idea. But we've also seen, the Great Depression. We've also seen things like in the 70s when everybody ran out of resources all of a sudden. We saw things like the 2008 housing crash. And those are all because of bad acting in those systems. Now, fortunately, the current financial system allows those things to move quite slowly. But with the introduction of new technologies and those extra efficiencies, those things start to move more rapidly, which is part of my concern. Is are we doing something without fully understanding what the repercussions will actually be? Now, so all that means to me is essentially I want to make sure that we watch those smaller nation states experiment with this and see what actually happens. And then maybe if it works really well, we see the pros, we see the cons, we start to learn, there might be developed like the 3 rules of robotics, except for CBDCs, right? Certain rules that have to be in place for them to function. And that I'm okay with moving through that very, very slowly and introducing that technology with great caution. What I want to make sure is that we're doing it with great caution, not being bad citizens by not speaking out and saying something like, guys, I don't know if this is going to work. We need to really have some evidence before we start playing around with this, because it's going to be a very potentially dangerous technology.
Gotcha. Nick?
One of the things that is missing with the CBDC is that it's decentralized, right? So I think if you want to limit the harm that they can cause, you should actually decentralize the currency. And the good news is that we already have one, and that's Bitcoin. So this is actually sort of an exercise in futility, right? Because I think they also recognize that they cannot compete directly with Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is here and it has enough momentum, and they try to hold it back and slow it down, but they cannot really get it back into the genie back into the bottle. It's out there. So I think one of the ways that we can actually mitigate the rise of CBDCs is actually through Bitcoin, right? Because if Bitcoin becomes big enough, it automatically means that the CBDCs cannot grow that big, right? Because Bitcoin has already taken up their space, as it were. And that means, the bigger Bitcoin gets, the easier it also becomes for people to vote with their feet, so to speak, to move their the value, their earnings into Bitcoin if the CBDC runs afoul. But I think both of you are right. I think at first they will try to behave and try to do good things with CBDCs, or at least advertise it. And I think they will also point to these smaller islands and say, look at those islands. Look, they're doing great, right? What's wrong with the CBDC? So I think they'll use those islands as examples in their advertising or marketing of CBDCs to point out that there's nothing wrong with the CBDC in principle. But I think if you have like an army the size of America at your back, and you implement in CBDC, and you have already full control of the global reserve currency, I think that's a very, very dangerous combination to have. And I don't see the Federal Reserve or governments being strong enough to resist the temptation of abusing their power, right? Because that's basically what we're talking about. If you give somebody absolute power, are you not gonna abuse it, right? I mean,
right.
Some people might not, but
yeah, it sort of brings into question, like, for instance, I remember this TED talk at one point that was given, and I wish I could find it because it was so good. But it basically said the success of any nation is based on its rule set. And so we get to create the rules of the game. And if we create the rules properly, then it's going to guarantee our success. This is what the founding fathers did with the Constitution. And this is why we still are able to see the freedom that we do have. If you look at Unchained Capital, this is one of the things they've done with Bitcoin, right? They say, hey, listen, there's multi-sig. Now, this multi-sig rule set was built by someone, but with Unchained Capital, they say you have 3 keys. We hold a key as Unchained Capital, you hold a key, and you can give the key to someone else that you trust. So it takes 2 of the 3 keys to move Bitcoin. So if you were to pass away and your loved ones, your beneficiaries had a key, they could come to us Unchained Capital. And now there's 2 keys. We can now move that Bitcoin wherever your loved ones want, or they can maintain it with us. Or if you and your loved one decide you don't want to deal with Unchained Capital anymore, both of you together can take and move that Bitcoin. So it's a rule set there that guarantees you security, safety of hodling your Bitcoins. The same way goes with the CBDC. If the rule makers, and this is where we have our conversation, probably our differing of points, if we can get people in the government who's willing to say, let us implement rules into the CBDC that guarantees people that they maintain their financial control, they maintain their privacy, and they maintain their freedom, CBDC would be well. And they can't come back later and just on a whim make a change to that rule. Like it takes a lot of work. I don't think Unchained Capital can just arbitrarily change the rule on multi-sig because they don't control multi-sig. Someone else controls multi-sig and the code behind it. So this is what we have to do. Take a rule set with these government entities to implement something like this that benefits everyone without someone having control. Now, like you said, Bitcoin has already done that. So we don't really need to create anything. Let's just do it on Bitcoin.
Yeah. And I would also like to add one more thing, because I already sort of mentioned Bitcoin as being like a safeguard against the corruption within CBDCs. I think there's another safeguard that you could also implement, and that is create a free market with other coins and other cryptocurrencies and other groups of developers out there, and that they have the same ability to promote their currency as, let's say, a digital dollar. So if you have a digital dollar, that's, maybe fine, but also leave room for all those other cryptocurrencies to compete with the digital dollar on an equal footing, so that people can sort of choose which ones they actually like to use. And then the digital dollar has to, be the best. So I think, if you have free competition, but I think they won't allow it. But let's say if you keep that plus keep the ability to buy and sell and hodl and whatever you want to do with Bitcoin. If you have those 2 things, then I think a CBDC system might not get as bad as it can get. And then you can also have the benefits of a CBDC, right? Because I totally understand that, you sometimes have to use levers in order to fight recessions, to mitigate the pain of the people, all those kind of things that kind of make sense in theory. Only the problem is once you have those levers, and through the Cantillon effect, the people that start controlling those levers, working around the constitution and stuff, start abusing those levers. And that you see that throughout history with every fiat currency that has ever been created, from China till India till America, you name it. It has always gone back to zero, its intrinsic value.
Yeah, in Kenya, there was an article written from Finbold that says Kenya's central bank governor admits pressure to convert country's reserves into Bitcoin. And here's something he said. He said, this was information from someone else. He said, I do know you're under a lot of pressure from some of these people that are pushing these things, cryptocurrencies, because for them it is good. I can assure you a lot of people that have been pushing me to put our reserves in Bitcoin. But here's what he says. I would have been out of my mind with that sort of craziness, he says. There are still people that in these countries, these central bank governors, that are not willing to shift to Bitcoin. They're like, you got to be out of your mind. I'm not going to tie my reserves to this volatile asset. Why should I? So what would you guys say to, if you were sitting here talking to a bank governor like that, what could you possibly tell him that would make him say, okay, I think I'm going to adopt Bitcoin as a standard?
May I take that question first?
Yes, go ahead.
So of course, a government or a central bank doesn't want to adopt Bitcoin, right? Because it takes their control out of their hands. So they become sort of obsolete, right? They obsolete themselves by adopting Bitcoin.
Right.
So of course, no central bank in the world likes Bitcoin, right? It makes them. I saw this short video by Christine Lagarde, who is of course also a controversial figure with her history, but she's our ECB central bank manager, and she said like the period of free banking in America was terrible, right? Banks would go bust all the time, people would lose their money, people got hurt, and she's right? So the period of free banking was, people could issue their money, and you could bank wherever you wanted, and people would get hurt through scams, right? Or busts when the economy goes down, and these banks are over leveraged, and people claim their money all at once, and there wasn't enough money in the bank. So that's true. So, and that happened a lot, and a lot of people got hurt. But with the central banking, which she promotes and says, at least central banks create stability and transparency and blah, blah, blah. But the problem is you create this super cycle, that's 100-year cycle. And then everybody goes bust at the same time, and not a little bit, but completely, right? They get completely wiped out. And not only that, you also reward the bad actors for doing that, because who profits from that collapse? It's those people who are in power and pulling the levers and blowing up the system, right? So that is something that really concerns me, because now in this day and age, we have a fiat currency, the dollar, that has been ballooned out of proportion. And now we're seeing the damage it causes to other countries and continents around the world, and the wars it causes, and the devastation and the hunger. And I'm not blaming Americans or even the American government for doing that, because all the countries are doing the same thing, and even the people sort of vote for this policy, right? So it's not even the leaders; the people themselves also profited from years of prosperity and freedom and all the benefits that it also created. But now you see the price of that system, and the point is, we have a global currency now, right? The dollar is a global currency, and it has been corrupted, sadly. And the point is, what comes next after this system breaks down, right? And the bad actors get rewarded for doing that.
Yeah, and again, like I said, go ahead, stop, Pigeon.
Well, I was going to say, I think that's a really good question. What happens after everything crashes? And if we look at history, what has happened in the past after everything crashes is that we slowly but surely develop better ways of governing ourselves. The
Mhm.
the whole problem to me, if I can be esoteric for a moment, is
Mhm.
that we don't have an honest approach to deciding what the best way to build a civilization is. We have instead opinions and emotions, and I think this is right or wrong, instead of a very straightforward set of principles to operate by. We keep mentioning sovereignty. I believe that the best way to run a society is to give the individual sovereignty. But the unfortunate case is that with that sovereignty comes a lot of responsibility. And if we have faith in ourselves that we can bear that responsibility, then it works out really, really well. I think that's actually where a lot of the prosperity and things that we've profited from largely came from in the US. Is for some large period of time, we decided that the individual was actually sovereign and that you were actually free to do as you please, assuming it doesn't hurt anybody else, which is what gave us those set of rules. That's actually what the founding forefathers built the idea of this country on. We had to have checks and balances to limit the power of the government so that the individual stayed as sovereign as possible. Now, we do need a government because I am not going to put together a militia that's going to be able to fend off the Russian military, right? I just don't have that capacity as an individual. So I needed the government to fend off potentially bad actors or aggressive military attacks, things like that. And I need the government to also enforce that my neighbor doesn't become a tyrant, and help me with those things. But aside from that, the government should be very, very uninvolved in my day-to-day personal business. I should be able to be the king of my own life. And this is why I always talk about Israel wanting a king. In the biblical stories, the kind of later part of the Old Testament is called the major and minor prophets. And they go through this series of a prophet basically calling out the government and saying, you're being tyrannical. We need to stop this. We need to get back to our faith in the individual, or in the Bible, they talk about God, of course. But it also says that God's in all of us, right? And there's a very, very consistent metaphor there. The people bear that responsibility until they become sort of lazy and go, well, I don't want to have to bear this responsibility. Can someone else please take care of this for me? So then they give that sovereignty to somebody to take care of them. And then that person becomes corrupt over time, or that entity becomes corrupt over time. And then a prophet has to come along and go, well, the reason that this is all happening, the reason everything is going to shit, if you'll excuse my French, is that just becomes an issue because now we need to take back that responsibility. We need to, again, to use a biblical metaphor, pick up our cross and bear that weight and carry it up the hill. And the people that I know do not want to do that. The time I've had trying to just get people at work to do their jobs, to make basic commitments to be there and exchange their time for their finances is unbelievable. Nobody wants to take responsibility anymore. So right now Israel wants a king, and I'm really afraid we're going to pay for it. And the way that we have technology and everything set up right now, when we pay for it this time, it's, you think it was bad in the 20th century with World War I and World War II. Just wait. Just wait.
Yeah,
The technology
and
that we have
I
now
don't.
can kill people on scales that we've never, ever, ever seen before.
True. And I don't think it has to get there. I think that right now, the conversation that we're having about CBDCs is where they need to be. It's like, let's make sure
Yes.
that the voices can prevail now to help these governments make decisions that make sense. Now, again, if governments just want to maintain control, like as we call it, then I think that, again, we put people in. I got a good friend, Matthew Deemer, who's running for Congress in Ohio 7. I don't believe that if he got elected, that he is trying to control the people of Ohio 7. It's what you just said, Style, though, is when they become corrupted, right? Will Matthew eventually get to the point to where he becomes corrupted, or will he continue to govern in a way that makes sense? This is what we have to do. Take that responsibility. This is what Satoshi Nakamoto did. He says, listen, I'm going to create a technology that takes this out of the hand of people to have to make certain decisions. We will let Bitcoin make those decisions. And Bitcoin stays decentralized, censorship resistant for a reason, because at the end of the day, it puts it on you with your own morals and values to do what you have to do. Either you will or you won't. And if you won't, you won't be doing it with Bitcoin. But if you decide to, you can do it with Bitcoin, which is great. So and that's what I would tell a central governor. I would say a central bank governor, I would say, listen, Bitcoin can be very, very beneficial to your organization, but you're not going to have the same control you had before. And as long as you were willing to give up that control, you will benefit financially as a result of adopting Bitcoin, because it's far easier to do it that way than to ultimately get overtaken by Bitcoin anyway. It's going to happen. Either you can do it with or without. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah. And I agree with Nick about the fact that if we let them run side by side, I'm much more okay with that. If they were to say, you know, in the US, make Bitcoin illegal to operate and start sending jackboots to knock down people's doors and shut down mining operations, then that's an issue, right? And I don't mean to criticize the government overly much. I know that it's made up of imperfect people. I get it, and you're right. It's our responsibility to voice our opinions. But that's my focus, really, especially in the space in general, is values and principles that we can operate on that lead us down a good path. And I don't mean to be sensationalist or fear mongering or anything. I just want people to wake up a little bit and realize that this decision that we're making as a civilization is vitally important to our continued profitability and prosperity.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I would also say to a central bank or a government who wants to adopt Bitcoin, look at El Salvador, right? I mean, maybe they're being too optimistic about the news that's coming out of El Salvador, because they do have vested interest to sort of promote it and make it look as super good. But in general, you can say that it has led to a lot of extra investment into the economy. Instead of a brain drain, you got a brain influx. I think it has done El Salvador tremendous good, despite the low price of Bitcoin, because everybody was saying, like, you know, if Bitcoin drops, then El Salvador will go bust. Well, that has clearly not happened. So I think El Salvador is like a perfect image of what it could lead to. And even though I don't fully agree with some of the things that Max Kaiser says, you know, that it will lead to the end of all wars and you know, all the other, and it will monetize peace and all that. I think it will lead to other problems, but I think it will decentralize, right? Because when you look at it from a bird's eye view, what central banks are doing is, you know, they're centralizing everything, right? That's what what the bank does. A central bank does. It wants to centralize power, and then you can get hierarchies. But what Bitcoin does is the opposite, right? It's like not a centrifuge, but a decentrifuge. It decentralizes everything. So that means that the power will also be decentralized among people, and you would probably get more of a Wild West kind of society. And that sounds maybe pretty bad to some people, but I think you would get pockets of really prosperity, and where people do great things, and where the society is organized very well. But you could also, you know, get situation that is a little bit more cowboyish, right? So that's like the sort of shadow side that central banks like to point out about Bitcoin, and that's why they are necessary. But the shadow side of central banking taking complete control is, of course, that you get a totalitarian system, but one that is much worse than we have seen in the 20th century, because it would be global.
Yeah. If you look at what you brought up El Salvador, this is what the president said. He said in 2021, our GDP rose 10.3%. Income from tourism rose 52%. Employment went up 7%. New businesses went up 12%. Exports up 17%. Energy generation up 19%. Energy exports went up 3,291%. And internal revenue went up 37%, all without raising taxes. And this year, the crime and murder has gone down 95%. If El Salvador succeeds, many countries will follow. If El Salvador fails, we will refuse to. No country will follow. But I think it's true. All of this is a result of Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think they've already succeeded, right? I mean, if you can do this in this market, you have succeeded, right? I mean, what else do you need? These numbers are insane. And I mean, they might be like, made better, like the CPI, they also make these numbers look better than they actually are. So, but even if they're like half of what they say, or 1/3 or 1/4 of what they say, then they're still incredible.
Yeah. Exactly. No, and that again goes to show that this is definitely a rising topic that's going to continue to be at the forefront, I think, of a lot of different discussions going forward, because they're coming. CBDCs are coming. The question becomes, which country is going to implement them with the proper rule set that will allow people to maintain financial control, freedom, and operate the way they should, without having control put on them.
So if I can propose
Sure.
a question,
Sure.
I kind of want to make this a little bit more concrete for my own purposes. So derail me if need be. But when you both meet people in your life or talk to people in your life, who do you normally talk to most frequently about CBDCs, and what do you normally tell them?
You want to go first?
Yeah, generally, yeah. I mean, I can go. Yeah, I mean, it's general people on social media. I mean, I don't know. The average person, my family members, friends that are around me that aren't into crypto, most of them are not even asking about CBDCs. And when you bring the topic up, for the most part, they just sort of casually, it is there, but they're not paying attention. Nobody's paying attention to this. None of my just regular people, they're not. And I can bring it up with them, but it still won't really resonate, because even the concept of the fact that the money in the bank isn't yours doesn't resonate with them. So CBDCs doesn't even come close. That's for me.
Yeah, I actually, Bitcoin Live is actually a mission, right? That's something that we sometimes forget to talk about. When we started Bitcoin Live, it was actually a sort of a mission to get people on crypto, and especially the decentralized kind of crypto, and to promote the decentralized ethos of crypto, and especially Bitcoin, of course. So my whole life since that moment has been missionary. And I've talked to many people outside of crypto to try to raise awareness of crypto and this decentralized ethos that I'm talking about, but also the shadow side, right? What it's actually fighting against, because many people. So, for example, when you try to explain Bitcoin, or crypto, there's like 4 things, or even 5 things that you have to sort of explain. First, you have the technical side of the story, right? You have to explain what Bitcoin is on a technical level. Then you have to explain what markets are, because some people say, oh, you said it would go up and the market is going down, right? So you have to explain what markets are. Thirdly, you have to explain what money is, right? Because many people have no idea what money actually is. They think the stuff that they have in the bank account is money, but it's banks. Bank can do whatever they want with what's in that account. It's the bank's account. So and then you also have to explain the situation that we've arrived at, right? Because that's actually the biggest thing to explain and the hardest thing to explain, because people look outside their window and they think, oh, everything is fine, right? My bus is riding on time, my trains are riding on time, my government is arranging everything looks great. And then you have to explain, no, things are not so great as they look outside, because the system is about to blow up in one gigantic nuclear explosion. And we have to take action, right? So, but that's a very sort of difficult story to tell people, that the system is about to blow up or implode, or however you want to put it, and that Bitcoin was actually created as a reaction to the system. And then finally, on top of all of that, you also have the news outlets that are pushing FUD like there's no tomorrow, right? So everything that's negative about Bitcoin and crypto, the news outlets are flooded with it. Except for the people inside of crypto who sort of focus on the good news. But outside of crypto, it's only bad news. Criminals, you name it, wasting energy. We know all the FUD. You did a really great show on that with Gingerly.
Thank
you. So you have to take all of that into account when you explain it to no coiners or newbies. And I've been doing that. And even though sometimes people react like, what are you talking about? If you keep repeating it, and if you break it down into simple blocks, and if you make predictions, people do pay attention. And the more predictions that come out, the better they listen to you, right? So my advice to people out there within crypto and trying to sort of convert no coiners to Bitcoin and crypto is actually to explain all of these things as best as you can in simple blocks, and then people will listen. I did reach a lot of people who might not be in crypto, but they are willing to listen, and they see that you're not talking nonsense. And at some point, I'm sure they will also buy Bitcoin, and some already have. And that's another problem, because then they bought it at the peak, and now.
So your methodology is essentially to create credibility through a positive track record to establish a reason for that person to listen to the information that you have, thereby rendering you able to take the time to actually explain that myriad of things, correct?
Yeah, and to simplify it as best as you can.
Okay,
and,
cool.
And
so
one of the biggest things that you have to explain is that Bitcoin was a reaction to something. So that something you have to explain. And that is the economy that's imploding, right? And people are seeing it imploding, right? So if you can predict there will be wars, and there are wars, they say, hey, wasn't that something that he said? And those
Right.
kind of things. And then they start piecing together, oh wait, it's the money system that's causing all this suffering.
Interesting. So one of my, you talked about Bitcoin Live and the mission overall, which I am obviously pretty aligned with. One of my missions is to, or kind of the way that I see my purpose almost, is to take what wisdom I have, which to be fair is rather minimal, but it's growing, and package that in a way that I can very easily and quickly gift that to someone, so that they can actually digest it and take it with them, and hopefully with the end result that it improves their lives overall. So in that, I've been playing a game at work lately. I work with a bunch of people, and I really try hard not to seem like the tinfoil hat guy while I'm at work, because I'm a boss at work, right? I need them to trust me and not think I'm some kooky guy. So I've noticed, and maybe this will be helpful for other people out there who are listening, to maybe start encouraging those actual people in real life to look into this, wake up a little bit, and maybe do their own research, is I've just been doing very small plugs. Whenever someone has a complaint about an overdraft fee or something like that, or maybe they say, oh gosh, like, what, I wish I could do X with my currency, but the bank's taken 4 days to blah, blah, blah. I'll just be like, hey, buy Bitcoin. And that's all I say. I literally, I'll be walking through a door or something and just like poke my head like backwards through the door, hey, buy Bitcoin, and close the door and just walk off. And I leave it at that. And what I've noticed is the more and more I do that, or the more and more I say, man, you think that's bad, wait for CBDCs. The more I do those little one-liners, the more people are coming to me aside from that and saying, hey, I've noticed that you talk about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies a lot. What's that about? And then I actually do get the time to explain them. So it's interesting. You're taking the like credibility route, and I'm taking this like interesting sort of like Trojan horse sort of route to maybe lure people in a little bit, get all the little pigeon babies coming to me in real life, and actually asking questions about all this. So I was just curious what your methodologies are, and how you pull people in, and hopefully people will start waking up a little bit.
I think there's also another thing that's at play, because because of the system that is imploding, each time it goes down a little bit further, it creates sort of chaos and disruption around it. And with each moment like that, people wake up. There's a new segment of people that wakes up and that is trying to orient themselves, because they're disoriented, right? So if you step in at the right moment with a convincing story, or like a logical story, then they listen at that particular moment, because before that moment they're not ready to receive yet, because their life is running around, humming along fine. So it has to be disrupted first by the system before they're willing to listen to you. So and that's happening faster and faster, of course.
I'm sorry, I don't know if y'all can tell I'm getting excited. I love this idea of the story of it all, right? Because the way that the human mind works, and the fact that you said oriented or they're disoriented, I don't know if you know this or not, but we actually have an orienting instinct in it's actually hardwired into your brain. And even like if you've heard of Jordan Peterson at all, he talks about lobsters. Lobsters have a very similar neurochemical system that creates this orienting instinct, where we have to actually know where we've come from in order to know where we are, and then we have to have a purpose or something that we're headed towards. And it's orienting because it's like orienteering, right? You use a compass to get around. You have to know. And I don't know if you've ever done this or not. I've gotten lost in the woods an uncountable amount of times on purpose, just to see if I can figure out how to get out. And the way that you do that is you have to figure out where you came from. That's how you figure out where you are. And then you have to go, okay, well, where would be the smart place to go? I'll head north. And then obviously there's certain techniques and things you can do to stay on track. But that orienting instinct and everything comes from the stories that we used to tell each other. We've stopped telling each other stories. We've started just consuming media about stories that are irrelevant or don't make sense. Whereas our mythologies used to be the stories that we told each other. And we actually gain unbelievable amounts of wisdom and information from these stories. You can package stories with so much information that it's unbelievable. The old classical Disney movies like Pinocchio, or the story about they actually did a remake recently of the story of Maleficent, and they did a phenomenal job doing a mythological or archetypal story that was so informative. And I actually spent hours upon hours with my ex actually trying to break down and explain the mythology of Maleficent, which was I think there's 2 of them out right now. And we could spend hours talking about that. And that mythology is what eventually led, or the mechanism that creates those mythologies and makes them so useful is actually what led to memes. And memes are the way that we now package those stories and those mythologies, those values. We package them into this tiny little image, but somehow everybody knows exactly what you mean when you say that feeling when X, right? The most effective memes are the most relatable memes. And the reason that they're the most relatable is because they're taking some really high level complex topic, they're packaging it in a single image, and then they can just take that and go, hey, we're right, right? And all of the people go, yes, that's right. I don't know what it is about it, but that's correct. I know in my bones, my soul reacts to that for some reason, and that's accurate. And that's one of the things that we really need to start working on in regards to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in general. Is what is the actual narrative? What is the story? How does the Excalibur level sword of cryptocurrency, how do I pull that out of the stone and use it to become the hero that slays the dragon?
Agreed.
No, it's true.
Right, I'm step down off my soapbox.
That's okay. And I think that's exactly where CBDCs are. And I think we can take that culture and move that culture into the sort of world of CBDCs and help these regulators. And this is one of the things that I think Bitcoiners should get better at, is being more optimistic about us being able to reach these regulators and these legislators and say, hey, listen, put this framework into place so that we can maintain individual sovereignty. And I know how we say governments are not about that, and I get it, but at the end of the day, we need to get a little bit more optimistic to make that happen when it comes to CBDCs, because we know for a fact they will get implemented. How they get implemented is the question, and that's where I think we have the job to make sure we try and at least put our voice there.
I think you also want to go, Paul, to your game, but before
yes, I will. Go ahead. This is good.
But I want to ask you, because you shared a very important article a few days ago, I think it was last week or the week before, about politicians not being able to hodl Bitcoin.
Yes.
And you were asinine about it, and I totally agree, because I think that is the litmus test that will be very important, right? If politicians and people in general, but also politicians are very important, not just in America but all over the world. If they're not allowed to hodl Bitcoin or transact in it or whatever, that is a very dangerous sign. And I think politicians should ask themselves the question, right? If Bitcoin is not a problem, why can't I hodl it? And if it is a problem, that's more reason to hodl it. And I think the last reason why politicians should actually start hodling Bitcoin and buying it is, it could actually lead to a wonderful future, right? If we actually let Bitcoin do its thing and instead focus our energy and attention on CBDCs, the attention that we put on CBDCs, if we put that on Bitcoin, we could actually lead to a really, probably a golden age, right? Because it would decentralize power. It would put power back to the people. Like Pigeon says, like it put responsibility back into the hands of people. And of course, that would be scary at first because people haven't, been used to it for a long time, because fiat takes your responsibility away. So you would reconnect with that responsibility with yourself and with your community. But it could lead, it has led, sound money, hard money, as Safedino Moose has shown in the Bitcoin standard, have always, periods of hard money have always created a golden age, which, go on.
Yeah, no, I was saying, and I think that's what ultimately can happen, is that CBDCs probably, and I believe this, and I said this on Crypto Campfire. They had a podcast, Campfire Crypto, and they were saying, and we were talking about the future. And I said, I believe ultimately everything's going to be pegged to Bitcoin, right? Even these CBDCs will be pegged to Bitcoin. Everything will ultimately come back to Bitcoin. And so while we see CBDCs coming into place, I definitely understand with you. I agree with you. If we could all adopt Bitcoin, I think eventually Bitcoin will be adopted. There are phases, and maybe CBDC is one phase that eventually gets changed that does come back to Bitcoin. So I think it ultimately will definitely get there. So,
well,
fingers crossed.
One of our IDs, we are, I'm personally a big fan of Jimmy Rickards. You have run into him a few times. He has his lesser sides, but his predictions are pretty spot on. And I sort of adopted his model for what's happening, and he's mostly focused on gold. And he says there will be a new gold standard, and there will be an SDR, and etc. But you can easily translate all of what he says into digital currencies, right? You can have a cryptocurrency variant of the SDR, which he is now talking about, by the way. Like Russia and China creating a CBDC and then linking it to a commodity like gold or oil or gas or whatever, or a basket of commodities, and then putting the accountancy in Switzerland, some place that people still have faith in, that it has been, that it's all right, something like that. But for gold, you can substitute Bitcoin, of course, right? Because gold and Bitcoin are basically, from a certain perspective, the same thing. And then you can link the reset of the whole financial system to a Bitcoin standard instead of a gold standard. And I think what you just said is very important, because that is part of it. CBDCs can be manipulated ad infinitum, right? So why would one country trust the CBDC of another country? No way. No way. So
That's
what
true.
do they need? What do they need to transact among themselves? Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So they will link their CBDCs to a Bitcoin standard because they don't trust each other as far as they control them. And on top of that, you also have a space economy that's just around the corner. If you start colonies, as American history shows, colonies can revolt. And, a colony outside of planet Earth would never, ever use a CBDC of planet Earth, right? That doesn't make any sense. Nor will they ship gold in space rockets or paper money. It doesn't make any sense. So also on that account, when you look into the future, Bitcoin is here to stay. And I think, so I'm not worried about Bitcoin. Bitcoin will do fine with or without us. Bitcoin doesn't need our help. It will be around because it's it is part of the system already. Corporations need it, governments need it, central banks need it, everybody needs it. But the problem is, can normal people like us have direct ownership of Bitcoin? That's the question. Will they try to centralize it and keep us from hodling and owning our own Bitcoin and using it?
Well, I think we got politicians that are in Congress that's definitely going to fight against that. So I don't know. I think that the CBDC future is definitely still being researched, being checked out. I think people are trying to figure it out. Ultimately, we just have to wait and see how this thing plays out, but implement our voices where we can and make sure we're helping with this process and we don't just let it happen.
No.
True.
By the way, I wanted to say thank you, Paul. Your optimism is extremely encouraging to me. I really always appreciate the reminder that not everybody who works in government is horrific or evil. I need to hear that occasionally, and I really appreciate it, because sometimes I get lost in my own cynicism and my own pessimism. So thank you for continuing to help me have faith, and thanks for showing out as one of the people who actually does do good in that system, and I look forward to hearing more from you in that regard.
Yeah, and then also, I think the focus that you always put on responsibility, and also, asking our representatives to do what we want, right? Because you can reach these people, right? They're not on the other side of the earth or something. You can reach out and tell them, we want this and not that. And you explain how people can do that and how they can actually influence politics. And because the other route is, of course, not so good.
Yeah, Georgia Capitol Crypto. I mean, he's done a great job of putting legislation out there, and I think that if anything, I think more people should reach out to George, because he's been in the chair of dealing with politicians. He's worked for John Cornyn, who's in Texas, a senator, and just let us know, how do you reach these politicians? And if you think about it, and this is what I try and tell most folks, politicians is one person, and they're trying to legislate on behalf of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. They can't talk to all of us at the same time. They have staff, so we have to be friendly with their staffs, talk to their staff so their staff can get our voices to them so that they understand. And so, as frustrated as we are with the process, I think if we keep working, Dennis has done a big push saying talk to your local representatives, because you have a federal, here in the US, you have a federal component, you have a state component. Make sure you're talking to those state folks as well as the federal folks. And then, let's keep trying to work with this as a community to get things moving in the right direction. I think it's possible.
Yeah, and I think there's two more things. The first thing that I already mentioned is, Bitcoin doesn't only decentralize people, it also decentralizes politicians, right? So the more Bitcoin each politician holds, the more independent and critical that politician can become, because it sort of gets him or her outside of the party system, right? Because the party system basically has also been corrupted. Which is a shame, but yeah, I think in the EU it's exactly the same thing as in everywhere else on planet Earth. So that's one thing, but I think the other thing that you also mentioned, right? If a politician feels that he's actually representing a community of people and that the people actually want the same thing as that he or she does, then that politician has much more leverage, much more power than if everybody says like, oh, I can't do anything, I don't know how it works, we're all doomed, right? So people should go out there and show support for the right politicians and the right measures, because then those politicians will be much more powerful and much more effective and have much more leverage on decision making.
No, it's impossible for a representative government to actually represent the people if their constituency doesn't let them know what they think.
Exactly. Well, hey guys, let's wrap it there. My Cowboys are playing the Commanders, and I am going to get to that game. But hey, everyone, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening in. This has been a great conversation. And maybe the three of us can get back together again, probably in the next couple of months or so, and maybe revisit where things have moved on from now, or maybe even 4 or 5 months from now, to revisit where things are going with CBDCs and see how they go. If you're someone who is in the United States, definitely reach out to your representative. Even if you're global, start finding out what's going on in your country about CBDCs so that you can have your voice be heard, and just share Bitcoin with them. Because we all believe that Bitcoin ultimately is the place to turn to for our freedom and for our sovereignty. And so if you do that, I think that'll be great. I'm going to post some stuff out there, a link with a article that I'm curating right now and all the articles and podcasts, things like that. You guys can check that out. And Nick, again, thank you so much for developing and putting together this show, all the work that you do, being the producer. We really appreciate it. So thanks so much. And thanks, Style, for coming on, man. Always love it and enjoy talking with you.
Yeah, of course. Always happy to be here.
Well, I couldn't do it without you guys. So it's a communal effort, and I could talk for hours about CBDCs. I have much more to say, but I'll
good. We're going to talk again.
Yeah. Episode 2.
Good. Cool.
Good.
All right, guys. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.